It's finally October, one of my favorite times of the year. Adults and children alike are indulging in candy, planning parties, and deciding what costume they want to wear on Halloween. For most people, this is the only time of year where they get to indulge in their spooky or darker side. We get to dress up as goblins, ghouls, sexy doctors, or even our favorite TV show characters. But what if the costume was so convincing it allowed the wearer to gain victims' trust, lure them to secretive places, and torture or even murder them? And what if those victims were children? Today, we are going to talk about Luis Garavito, a man who did just this to nearly 200 young boys, and spoiler alert, he is eligible for parole this year. I know, that fact alone makes you want to hold your breath, but it's okay. Let's take a nice deep inhale together, because it is time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're new. I hope you're having a great day. My name is Erin, and I'm fascinated by all things true crime, cults, and spirituality. On Saturdays, I explore a cult or a spiritual practice that I'm curious about, and on True Crime Tuesdays, we do just that, talk about a true crime case. I also like to make a weekly book recommendation, and this week's book is The Wrong Family. Now, if you want something that's more suspenseful and less disturbing, this is a great book for you. It's excellent storytelling, and it really keeps you guessing, it keeps you curious, and then the end just totally blows your mind, and there's a crazy twist, and I'll just let you read it. But yes, I highly, highly recommend this book. So if you like books or cults and true crime, I hope that you would please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here because I literally do not have anyone to talk about this in my real life. So I hope you enjoy me just talking to you for the next hour or so. So today's case or cases is extreme, and that's an understatement. When I first saw this case, it truly shocked me. And you may think that the title was clickbait, but no, this actually happened. And it's an ongoing investigation because it's speculated that this man didn't just torture and or murder 190 young boys, but it could have been up to 400. So obviously my first question when learning about this was how? How could one man possibly target so many children? Did he work with children? Just how did he have access to so many young lives? And how was he able to do this for so long? I mean, this spanned over multiple decades. You can't really begin to talk about Luis Garavito's crimes without first understanding where he came from and learn a little bit about the social unrest that was occurring in his country when he was committing these crimes. Garavito was born on January 25th, 1957 in Genova, Colombia, just 7 years prior to the beginning of what would become known as La Violencia, an armed internal war between the conservative government of Colombia and radical left guerrilla groups. The 1948 assassination of the liberal political leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan triggered the conflict, and thus the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, was created. The FARC, as well as other organized groups, wanted to protect the lives of poorer citizens and provide more socialized or even communist-style governing to help promote social support and social justice. The government, on the other hand, was fighting for ambivalent control. That's what I've gathered. Now, if you want to do a little bit more research, or if you want to enlighten the audience in the comments below and provide a little bit more detail, please feel free to go ahead and do that. My research says La Violencia began on May 27, 1964, and only recently came to, well, not even really an end, but to a 6-month ceasefire that began on August 3rd of 2023, so very recently. Now, there seem to have been multiple ceasefires and periods of time where there was incredibly violent conflict, and honestly, this could be its own multi-video series, so if you're curious about more details, again, please feel free to do more research because there is a lot to be learned. This was a nearly 60-year-long conflict. I wanted to focus on the facts that are really pertinent to this case, and this next detail is what's vitally important, because I'm sure you're also wondering, how can one man have harmed nearly 200 children? Due to this political violence and unrest, between 1958 and 2013, more than 5 million civilians were forced from their homes, displacing 2.3 million children. The children often became homeless without access to health care or education. And because of the violent nature of what was going on around them, sometimes their parents just weren't around or were possibly even dead. They were often looking for a helping hand. Sadly, 220,000 people were killed during that time frame, with 45,000 of them being children. With those numbers being even greater since 2013, it might not be a surprise that since 1985, 8,000 minors have disappeared. There are so many children without homes, facing the elements and the dangers of war-torn streets. A child might be more trusting to a man dressed as a priest offering them help, like they might be drawn to a wolf wearing sheep's clothing. Now, let's explore Garavito's upbringing. Violence wasn't just outside the Garavito home. He has said that his parents, Manuel Antonio Garavito and Rosa Delia Cubillo, would constantly fight in front of Luis and his 6 siblings. His mother was emotionally neglectful, and his father was a violent drunk. His father was also so unpredictably violent that his children often hid from him when he got home from work. The arguments between Garavito's mother and father would get so violent that Luis would defend his mother and step in, and often get beaten for doing so. Luis also speculated that perhaps his father sexually violated him as well, because they often slept in the same bed. I'm not sure how many beds were in the home, but from what I've read, it seems like it was common for family members to share beds, as the family did live in poverty. When he was a child, Garavito was bullied at school. He had astigmatism and had to wear a special pair of glasses every day to help with his condition. Although he showed enthusiasm for learning, it seemed that he had difficulty learning the material, and this, paired with the bullying, made him react violently towards his peers. Unfortunately, neither the teachers nor his parents stepped in to put an end to the bullying or the violent behavior. The only thing his dad did was pull Garavito from school to help make the family money. Garavito would join his father on errands and would later claim that this is when he endured torturous acts of physical and sexual abuse from older men whom his father had dealings with. As Garavito grew older, it seems he began to have confusing urges that were then met with guilt, and this guilt led to depression. Garavito was not allowed to have a girlfriend as a teenager, and he said that he began exercising his sexual urges towards his younger siblings who he shared a bed with. He convinced them to sleep naked in bed with him, and then he would end up groping his own siblings. When he did have the opportunity to be with a woman, he was often impotent. It seemed he wasn't attracted to women, but he felt he should be attracted to them. I'm not exactly sure what his family's religious background was, but I do know that he did attend a Pentecostal church later in life, so I can only assume that the shame he felt for not being attracted to women and trying to force himself into relationships with women is somehow linked to his and his family's Christianity. Of course, that's just speculation and is in no way a judgment of Christianity itself. I just know that some Christians are quite homophobic, and I just can't help but wonder if Garavito also had this societal or familial pressure. And there's even evidence of this. Garavito had been caught sexually violating 2 young male children, like under 10 years old, on 2 separate occasions. And instead of being angry that he had committed this act on anyone, his father was angry he hadn't chosen girls. Yeah, I'm just gonna let that one sink in for a second. His father later kicked him out because of quote-unquote homosexual behavior. I guess if he had violated women, it would have been just fine. I'm sure it's no surprise to you that Garavito became a deeply, deeply messed up individual, or maybe he already was one. By the time he was 16, he was rejected by his family and resented his siblings, or most of them, because they seemingly took his father's side. It seems that with the daily challenges of not having support, trying to make money, battling alcoholism, trying to return to God, he was really just trying to understand himself. He even frequented psychiatrists seeking out help for his disturbing urges, but nothing seemed to work, and he ended up attempting to unalive himself. He seemed to be aware that he had a problem, or a compulsion, as we've heard so many murderers refer to it. He would feel immense guilt and shame, and then he would try to seek forgiveness. But then he would act out on his urges, usually by finding a child, for lack of a better term here on YouTube, evening worker, who was most likely a young boy. And then after that encounter, he would deal with intense self-hatred and shame because he had acted upon those sinful urges. It just seems like he was in this cycle and he didn't know how to get out of it. And I do find this fascinating with serial killers because sometimes they're self-aware of their behavior and they have shame around it, but then they do it anyways. What's not clicking in their head to just stop? Stop the behavior. You recognize that it's bad, just stop. Why was he not able to stop seeking out children and harming them? So I was really curious about this, and honestly, I've always been curious about this. So I decided to reach out to a friend who has a background in forensic psychology, and this is what she shared with me. So she said that compulsions are similar to addictions, where the reward is seen as greater than the risk, rather than the other way around. There's also an impulse control issue, because the prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotions and thoughts, among a bunch of other things, has significantly less activity. So most likely he sought out help because he knew what he was doing was wrong. But when the impulse hit, he didn't have the actual control to not act out on it. Now, this is obviously an extremely simple explanation of a very complex issue, and I am in no way implying that it somehow justifies the horrific things that he did, but I just find the psychology so fascinating, so I did want to mention it. Now, in the 1980s, Garavito was in his 20s. He had gotten a job at a supermarket and began a relationship with a single mother. Once that relationship ended, he decided that now was the time to act out upon some of his most gruesome fantasies. His job provided him a 2-hour lunch break. During these breaks, he would often lure a young boy to a hiding spot, probably using treats or promises of work, bind, torture them, and oftentimes bite their private regions. He violated them in a very violent and sexual way before letting them go. He would carry items to aid in his torture, like candles and razor blades. He would keep a record of his victims in a notebook and sometimes even took pictures of them as little keepsakes of what he did to his victims. And I think that's so creepy. He's a guy that kind of might seem a little normal, going to work, carrying his satchel or his backpack, and inside he just has all of these torture tools. It's really, really scary to think about. And guess what? By this time, he hadn't even killed anyone yet, but he had tortured 100 children before the 80s would even end. It was around this time that he became more and more fascinated by mass murderers like Hitler and said he even admired him and liked the concentration camps. He became obsessed with another Colombian serial killer named Campo Elias Delgado and fantasized about committing a mass murder, killing his family, and then killing himself. Now, I know this is only the second video on this channel, but I've been watching true crime for many, many years, and I honestly don't think I've ever come across a more messed up criminal because it just seems to get worse and worse. Part of the reason I like learning about these things is because of the psychology behind it, and I can't seem to wrap my mind around how someone can be wired in this way to want to harm others. I mean, I'm a vegan. I don't want to hurt a fly. I cry when I've had to like stomp on a cockroach, like it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it. And I've watched so many true crime cases, and so frequently there are signs when the person is a young kid that something might not be quote unquote normal. Like something might, if they have a fascination with roadkill or they like harming and torturing animals. And I've always thought, why didn't these parents get their kid help? Like these are signs that something might need to be diagnosed. But Garavito was in and out of psychiatric care many, many times. He spent 5 consecutive years in a mental health facility when he was at the height of the harm he was causing. And it seemed that the behavior just kept escalating because he's violently tortured 100 children already, and we haven't even gotten to the parts where he starts murdering them. I mean, this story is really making me think that some of these people just can't be helped. It's just how they are. That's how they're wired, and that is incredibly horrifying to me because it feels like we just have absolutely no way to control or prevent this from happening. So the behavior, like I've said, just seems to keep escalating. We've gone through the 70s where he starts recognizing his strange, disgusting urges. Then we explored the 80s. He's in his 20s and he begins his awful acts of torture. And now we're in the 90s. And Garavito has reached his 30s, which he did all this before he was 35. It's just, there are absolutely no words. I cannot imagine. It's so scary. I think we assume that serial killers are older because they're so scary. I don't know, but it's shocking he did all this when he was so young. It's believed that before he turned 36, he had tortured and sexually violated 200 children. But in 1992, things would get a whole lot worse. After having an encounter with the devil via a Ouija board, he resolved to serve the devil after the devil apparently told him, and I quote, "kill. That with many killings, many things may come," unquote. I want to apologize now if I become a little emotional moving forward. I was practicing this script and it's just really difficult to get into. We are going to be getting into some more details about the murders, so trigger warning for you if you're sensitive to that, especially because these were acts done on children. I'm already getting a little choked up, so I do apologize if I get a little emotional. It's really difficult. And I want you to be mindful of your own mental health and just forgive me if I get a little choked up. On October 1st, 1992, Garavito attempted to lure a young boy before being found and beaten by police. And for whatever reason, this gave him more motivation to try again. So just a few days later, on October 4th of that year, Garavito would successfully commit his first murder. After spotting the victim, Juan Carlos, Garavito followed him, bought a butcher knife along the way, and then lured him to a secret spot. The victim was found castrated with his teeth knocked out. So Garavito would commit several more acts before moving to Bogota, where he killed another 8 boys on the outskirts of town. And this just went on and on. He started to dress up to evade suspicion and authorities and would often travel to different towns to commit these acts. He was apparently, this fact got me, he was afraid of the dark, but that meant he would attack his victims in the middle of the day, which is even more terrifying. Because of course a child is going to be less suspicious of a man approaching them in the middle of the day. I mean, especially if he looks like a priest or a monk. I mean, I think anyone would feel more comfortable during the day because the criminal is easier to spot. Someone might see him try something. So he would change his look. He would simply shave one day, or maybe he would dress as a monk the next, or a beggar, or a priest, and lure the children with promises of goodies, help, or even a job. He was very calculated. He would get the children to put their guard down. He was charming, kind to them initially. He would ask personal questions, get to know them as he walked them to the place where he would commit the crime, which, get this, he would sometimes bring them to the same place where he had committed a previous crime. So imagine being a child walking up and seeing a dead body of another kid and you just instantly know your fate. He would beat, torture, violate, and dismember the bodies. He would castrate some and decapitate others. And his acts just became more and more violent, gruesome, and disgusting as time went on. And then the violence became part of the pleasure he was getting from committing these acts of horror. After it was done, he would write down in his notebook what had happened. He kept track of his victims, sometimes their names, and what he had done to them. He even began collecting trophies, and some of these would include clothing, pictures, or even the dismembered toes of his victims. He would carry these trophies with him as he traveled. And when the suitcase of trophies got too heavy, he would drop it off at a sibling's or a girlfriend's house. And I just can't imagine the horror of finding out that your boyfriend or brother was storing the clothing and body parts of children in your own home. It would be absolutely devastating. And this would go on for the next 7 years. 7 years he evaded authorities. It's shocking. And I'm sure you're wondering, how did he do this for such a long time without a parent alerting the authorities? You know, why weren't there just notices everywhere of children gone missing? And, I'm sure some parents did, but we have to remember the state of the country. Parents were scared to trust authorities, so they weren't keen to tell the cops their children went missing for fear of being reprimanded themselves or not getting the help that they needed. Plus, there were so many children missing. There are still many children missing, or maybe even displaced, so there's probably just a lack of hope that anything could be done. It's really such a sad situation, and these poor parents, I really feel for them. I mean, they have to feel like they have no support, no one to help them, and that's literally what the conflict was about. Poor people wanting more support from their government. And who can you trust when you can't trust people who are supposed to protect you? However, it's not like the evidence hadn't started to pile up. Reports of mutilated bodies began to pop up, and the authorities had opened an investigation. In 1997, police came across a mass grave. This is hard. A mass grave where they found the mutilated bodies of where they found the mutilated bodies of approximately 25 boys. Other crime sites showed corpses with similar mutilations, and the case began to attract media attention because of the sheer frequency and ferocity of the attacks. He was getting nicknames like Goofy because of his costumes, but I really don't think that nickname gives true insight to the monster that he was, so he later became known as La Bestia, or the Beast, and that is exactly what he was and continues to be, a beast. The police had even questioned him before. They began recognizing his pattern and had witnesses saying they had seen him in the areas where the crimes were taking place. But he was very charming, and he knew exactly what to say to get out of it. He even claimed that the police were profiling him once because he had gotten injured, and at the time he had had a limp, and they thought that the criminal had a limp. It's like all that awareness he once had just gone right out the window. The prefrontal cortex had literally just shut off. So we've established that Garavito was fascinated by mass grave sites, and I'd like to remind you that he sometimes would bring his victims to the same location to commit his crimes. Well, in 1998, after 3 decades of violating children, that would be his first of many downfalls that led police to solve this mystery. Within 2 days, police had found the mutilated bodies of 3 children on the same hillside, and a note had been left there. I'm guessing it fell out of Garavito's pocket. I don't think he intended on leaving a piece of evidence like that behind, because this particular note led police directly to his sister's house. She gave them the bags he had left there with the trophies. I don't know if she knew what was in the bags or not, but she gave them a treasure trove of evidence, and thank goodness she did and didn't try to save him. Because, she had to have known for a very long time that something wasn't quite right with her brother. And thanks to this evidence, police were able to connect Garavito to a huge list of murders, and one day, after attempting a sexual assault, police were able to arrest Garavito thanks to an eyewitness that connected him to that assault. The beast was finally stopped on April 22nd, 1999. Now, by this point, the evidence was stacked against Garavito. Not only did the police have the trophies, they had DNA that matched Garavito to many of the murders. Those special glasses I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, the ones he was bullied over, were found at one of the crime scenes and were able to be directly connected to him. There was nothing he could do besides confess. And since he had kept a creepy diary of each act, he was able to confess to 140 murders. He is truly evil in human form. 140. That's not even including the 100 that he violated previously, and even more are speculated to be connected to him because we don't know for sure. You really have to do some mental gymnastics to accept that this is possible. He holds the record for most murders in the entire world. He's the most deadly serial killer in history, and he has the chance to get out of prison. It's mind-boggling. I'm still trying, I did so much research on this case, on this person, and I still am having a hard time believing that it's real. But it's real. So in 2001, Luis Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison. For fear of his safety, he is held isolated from all other prisoners. But I'm just curious, why are we protecting a mass child murderer? I don't understand. And again, he's eligible for parole this year. See, at the time of sentencing, Colombia law didn't have a death penalty and it didn't allow for a sentence of more than 40 years, but it has since been updated to 60 years. But because Garavito helped police find several bodies, that 40-year sentence was reduced to 22 years. I just can't. I can't. So he could be released any day now. Let's just pray that that doesn't happen. Because in a 2006 interview, Garavito is quoted as saying, and get this is going to blow your mind, it's crazy. He had ambitions to work in politics and a goal to help abused children. What? I think the way to help those children is to keep their abusers locked away for a very, very long time. Now, I wouldn't normally wish harm upon anyone, but I do think there's been some poetic justice here as Garavito has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. So if he were to be released, it's unlikely he would live very long. And if he did, let's hope he doesn't have the energy to commit another crime. Oh, this is such a difficult case. And I just keep thinking about the children, the fear they must have felt, the confusion to be growing up in a time like that, and the parents and siblings who lost their child, their brother, their sister. They may never know if their child was a victim of Garavito because there were just so many victims. There really isn't any closure for them except for the, honestly, probably fear that their son may have been subjected to Garavito. I can't imagine the pain they must feel from even having to consider the possibility that their child might have been Garavito's victim. It's really, there's just no words. Oh, are you okay? Oh my gosh. I feel like there's so much to unpack here. I mean, even after all the researching I did, it's still really difficult for me to comprehend this. And I can't believe all this happened because of one sick person. And I truly don't know if there are words to give this a proper conclusion. I'm honestly not quite sure how I should be ending this video. I usually like to try to find some kind of lesson to be learned from a case. And I guess first and foremost, one of them would be that some people just can't be saved. And it's really kind of unnerving to think about, but some people are truly just born evil. Even if they have awareness around their behavior, if they don't have the ability to change it, it's scary to say, but there's honestly nothing we can do. And there's no way to predict that someone might commit crimes like this. And for another lesson, now, look, I'm not a mother, but my mom always drilled into us that we should never trust another adult, never approach a car, never believe a stranger would be picking us up from school. She told me and my brother to just always start screaming if any stranger ever tried to approach us anywhere. She really drilled into our heads that strangers cannot be trusted. And although I really want to believe in the goodness of others, and I really do believe in the potential kindness of strangers, the smartest and safest thing to do is to always lead with caution and always keep your distance. You just never know who might be the wolf under the sheep's clothing. That's it for today. Please go recover, take a breath, hold on to your loved ones, and just please stay safe out there. Thank you so much for being here today, and I will see you in my next video really soon. Thanks again. Bye.